wife said, "We're happy without you." So I quietly forwarded a message that changed everything. Dean woke up Wednesday morning to find Viana already in the kitchen, fully dressed at 6 a.m. with the post-nuptial agreement spread across the counter. She'd been crying, her eyes were red and puffy, but she'd also been thinking. "I read it," she said without looking up. "All of it. And it's not fair, Dean. The custody arrangement, the financial restrictions, the monitoring. It's like I'm a prisoner in my own house." Dean poured himself coffee and sat across from his wife. "Viana, you had an affair for 6 months. You planned to divorce me while taking half my assets and shared custody of our daughter. You used our joint money to fund hotel rooms with another man. You discussed using Lily as leverage in custody negotiations." He paused. "What part of that behavior earned you the right to fairness?" "I made mistakes." "You made choices. Calculated, deliberate choices over 6 months. There's a difference." Viana's hands were shaking as she picked up the agreement. "If I sign this, what happens to us? To our marriage? If you sign it, we try to rebuild what you destroyed. Marriage counseling, transparency, accountability. You prove that you can prioritize our family over your personal desires. And if I don't sign it?" Dean looked at his wife with the cold clarity that had carried him through 15 years of business negotiations. "If you don't sign it, I file for divorce today, with full documentation of your affair, your financial infidelity, and your plans to use our daughter as a bargaining chip." "You said California was community property." "California is community property for marriages that end due to irreconcilable differences. Marriages that end due to documented adultery and financial fraud follow different rules, especially when one spouse can prove they've been the primary financial provider and the other spouse has been systematically deceiving them while planning their divorce strategy." Viana was quiet for a long moment. "What about James? What about him? You destroyed his life, his marriage, his business. I protected my family from a man who was helping my wife plan to steal my daughter and my assets. James Morrison made his own choices when he decided to target a married woman for financial gain. He loved me." Dean studied his wife's face. Even now, even after learning about James's financial situation and his complete disappearance from her life, Viana was still defending him. "Viana, James Morrison told his wife that he was working late while he was meeting you at hotels. He used his company credit card to pay for those hotels, meaning he was embezzling from his own business to fund your affair. He discussed taking custody of my daughter while he was married to another woman with children of his own." Dean leaned forward. "That's not love. That's opportunism. He saw a financially secure woman who was willing to betray her husband, and he calculated how to benefit from that betrayal. You don't understand what it was like between us. I understand exactly what it was like. You felt neglected and unappreciated, so you found someone who made you feel special. He felt financially insecure and professionally unsuccessful, so he found someone who represented stability and wealth. You both used each other to fill holes in your lives, and you both planned to use my daughter and my income to make your fantasy permanent." Viana started crying again. "I never meant for it to go this far. I never meant to hurt Lily. But you did mean to plan custody arrangements with another man. You did mean to discuss how to portray me as an absent father. You did mean to calculate how to maximize your divorce settlement while maintaining access to my income through our daughter." Dean stood up. "Viana, intent matters less than impact. Your choices have consequences regardless of what you meant to happen. So what do I do? How do I fix this? You sign the agreement or you don't. If you sign it, we spend the next year finding out if our marriage can survive your betrayal. If you don't sign it, we spend the next year finding out what divorce looks like when one spouse has documented proof of the other's systematic deception." Viana picked up the pen, then put it down. "Dean, if I sign this, will you ever forgive me?" The question hung in the air between them. Dean looked at his wife, the woman he'd loved for 15 years, the mother of his daughter, the person who'd shared his bed while planning to leave him for another man. I don't know, he said honestly. Forgiveness isn't something I can promise right now. Trust takes years to build and seconds to destroy. You destroyed 15 years of trust in 6 months of lies. But we could try. If you sign that agreement, we could try. If you don't sign it, there's nothing to try for. Viana looked at the document one more time. What about Lily? How do we explain this to her? We tell her that Mommy made some mistakes that hurt our family, and now we're working to fix them. We don't tell her about the affair or the divorce plans or the custody negotiations. We protect her from the adult consequences of adult choices. And if she asks questions? Then we answer them honestly but age-appropriately. Lily is 12, Viana. She's smart enough to know something is wrong and old enough to understand that actions have consequences. Dean checked his watch. I have a client call in 30 minutes. You have until I finish that call to make your decision. As he walked toward his office, Viana called after him. Dean, what if I hadn't gotten caught? What if James hadn't disappeared? What if you'd never seen those messages? Dean turned back to look at his wife. Then you would have destroyed our family, stolen my daughter, and taken half of everything I've worked for while convinced that you were the victim in the situation. He paused, letting the weight of that reality settle between them. The scariest part isn't that you plan to betray me, Viana. The scariest part is that you convinced yourself you were justified in doing it. That tells me everything I need to know about who you've become. Dean disappeared into his office, leaving Viana alone with the agreement and the pen. 45 minutes later, he emerged to find the document signed and Viana gone. A note on the counter read, Gone to my sister's to think. Back tonight. We need to talk about how to tell Lily. Dean picked up the signed agreement and felt something he hadn't felt in months. Relief. Not happiness, not forgiveness, but the simple relief of knowing that his daughter would be protected and his family's future was secure. 3 months later, Dean sat in Dr. Patricia Hernandez's office for their weekly marriage counseling session, watching Viana struggle to explain why she'd stopped attending individual therapy. I feel like everyone is trying to make me the villain, Viana said, her voice taking on the defensive tone that had become familiar. Dean acts like I'm some kind of monster, but he's the one who destroyed James's life. He's the one who set up surveillance and recorded private conversations. Dr. Hernandez, a seasoned therapist who'd seen every variation of marital betrayal, maintained her neutral expression. Viana, can you help me understand how you see the situation? I made a mistake. I was lonely, and I made a mistake. But Dean turned it into this war. He could have just talked to me when he found out. We could have worked through it together. Dean had learned to stay quiet during these sessions, letting Viana reveal herself through her own words. 3 months of counseling had taught him that his wife genuinely believed she was the victim in their situation. Viana, Dr. Hernandez said gently, when you say you made a mistake, what specifically do you mean? The affair, getting involved with James. I should have ended my marriage first if I was unhappy. What about the planning, the discussions about custody arrangements and financial settlements? Viana's face flushed. We were just talking. We weren't actually going to do anything. Dean finally spoke. Viana, you had a lawyer consultation. You discussed specific strategies for maximizing your divorce settlement. You talked about portraying me as an absent father to improve your custody position. I was exploring options. You were planning to destroy our family while I funded your lifestyle. Dr. Hernandez intervened. Let's focus on accountability. Viana, can you acknowledge the impact of your choices on Dean and Lily? Viana was quiet for a long moment. I hurt them. I know I hurt them. But I was hurting too. Dean was never home, never present. I felt like a single mother already. And how did you communicate that feeling to Dean before you began the affair? We had fights about it. I told him he worked too much. Viana, Dean said quietly, you told me you were proud of what I was building for our family. You encouraged me to take on bigger clients. You planned vacations around my travel schedule and bought a house that required my income to maintain, so I was trying to be supportive. You were enjoying the lifestyle my work provided while resenting the work itself. You wanted the benefits of my success without the requirements of my success. Dr. Hernandez made a note. Fiona, I want to ask you something directly. Do you believe your affair was justified by your feelings of loneliness? Fiona's answer came too quickly. No, but I understand why it happened. That's not the same thing as taking responsibility. I am taking responsibility. I signed the post-nup. I'm here in counseling. I'm trying to rebuild our marriage. Are you? Dean asked. Because rebuilding requires acknowledging what was broken. You still talk about James like he was a victim. You still describe your affair as a mistake instead of a choice. You still blame my work schedule for your decision to betray our family. Fiona turned to face him fully. What do you want from me, Dean? I've done everything you asked. I've given up my privacy, my independence, your independence? Dean's voice was dangerously quiet. Fiona, you used our joint money to fund your affair. You used our house to plan your exit strategy. You used our daughter as leverage in your custody discussions. What part of that was independent? The room fell silent. Dr. Hernandez waited, letting the tension build. Fiona, she said finally, I want to try an exercise. I want you to imagine that Dean had done exactly what you did. 6 months of affair, planning divorce while living in your house, discussing custody arrangements with another woman, using your money to fund hotel rooms. Fiona's face went white. How would you feel if you discovered that Dean had been planning to leave you for another woman while calculating how to take half your assets and shared custody of Lily? That's different. How is it different? Because I was unhappy. I was lonely. Dean was never there for me emotionally. And if Dean said he was having an affair because you didn't make enough money, because you didn't contribute equally to the household finances, because he felt like he was carrying the financial burden alone? Fiona stared at her hands. That's not the same thing, isn't it? You both made choices that prioritized your own needs over your family's stability. The only difference is that your needs were emotional, and his hypothetical needs would be financial. Dean watched his wife grapple with the comparison. 3 months of counseling had revealed something fundamental about Fiona's character. She could acknowledge her actions, but not their implications. She could admit to the affair, but not to the betrayal. She could recognize the hurt she'd caused, but not the trust she'd destroyed. Dr. Hernandez, Dean said, I need to ask Fiona something directly. The therapist nodded. Fiona, do you believe you would have gone through with the divorce if I hadn't discovered your affair? The question hung in the air like a challenge. I don't know, Fiona whispered. Do you believe you would have pursued the custody arrangement you discussed with James? I don't know. Do you believe you would have tried to portray me as an absent father to improve your settlement? Fiona was crying now. I don't know. Maybe. I was angry. I felt abandoned. So, you plan to abandon our family first. I wasn't thinking clearly. You were thinking very clearly. You consulted a lawyer, you researched community property laws, you calculated financial outcomes, you scheduled your affair around my travel schedule, you coordinated with James about custody arrangements. Dean leaned forward. Fiona, that's not emotional confusion, that's strategic planning. Dr. Hernandez intervened. Fiona, I think what Dean is trying to understand is whether you can acknowledge the calculated nature of your choices. Affairs can be impulsive, but the planning you engaged in suggests deliberate decision-making over time. Fiona looked up at Dean with tears streaming down her face. I was going to leave you. I was going to take Lily, and leave you, and start over with James. The admission hung in the air like a confession. I convinced myself that you didn't really love us anyway, that you were too busy with work to notice if we were gone, that Lily would be happier with a father figure who is actually present. She wiped her eyes. I was going to destroy everything you built and tell myself it was for the good of our family. Dean felt something shift inside him. Not forgiveness, but understanding. For 3 months, he'd been waiting for Viana to acknowledge the full scope of her betrayal. Now she finally had. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for finally telling me the truth." "Does this change anything?" Viana asked. "Between us?" Dean looked at his wife, the woman who'd planned to steal his daughter and destroy his life while living in his house and spending his money. "It changes everything," he said, "because now we can actually start dealing with what really happened instead of pretending it was something else." Dr. Hernandez made another note. "This is progress. Viana, how do you feel about acknowledging the full scope of your intentions?" "Terrified," Viana whispered, "because now Dean knows exactly who I was willing to become." Dean reached across the space between them and took his wife's hand. "Viana, I've known who you were willing to become for 3 months. The question is, who are you willing to become now?" For the first time since the affair began, Viana looked at her husband without defensiveness, without justification, without blame. "I don't know," she said, "but I want to find out." Dean stood in the kitchen of their Westfield home, watching Viana help Lily with her homework at the dining room table. The scene looked almost normal. Mother and daughter bent over math problems, pencils scratching on paper, the comfortable routine of family life. But Dean knew better now. He knew that normal was a performance, that routine could hide betrayal, that comfort could mask calculation. Viana had kept her word. She'd attended individual therapy twice a week for 9 months. She'd submitted to phone and computer monitoring without complaint. She'd taken over 100% of Lily's school and activity responsibilities, proving she could prioritize their daughter over her own desires. Most importantly, she'd stopped lying to herself about what she'd done. The marriage counseling had continued for the full year, and Dr. Hernandez had been clear about the prognosis. Trust could be rebuilt, but it would take years. The relationship they'd have going forward would be different from the one they'd had before. More honest, more accountable, more deliberate. "Dad, can you help me with this problem?" Lily called from the dining room. Dean joined his wife and daughter at the table, looking over Lily's shoulder at the algebra homework that would have been impossible for him at her age. "What's the problem?" he asked. "I can't figure out what x equals." Dean smiled. "Well, that's the point of algebra. You use the information you have to figure out what you don't know." He showed Lily how to isolate the variable, how to work backwards from the answer to understand the process. "The trick is to remember that every equation has to balance," he explained. "What you do to one side, you have to do to the other side." As Lily worked through the problem, Viana looked up at Dean. "How do you do that? Make everything seem so logical?" 15 years of consulting. You learn to break down complex problems into manageable steps. Is that what you did with us? Broke down our marriage into manageable steps? Dean considered the question. "I broke down the crisis into manageable steps. The marriage, that's still a work in progress." Viana nodded. "Dr. Hernandez says we're making good progress." "We are. But progress isn't the same as completion." "I know. Sometimes I wonder if you'll ever really forgive me." Dean looked at his wife, the woman who'd betrayed him so completely that he'd had to rebuild his understanding of who she was and what she was capable of. "Viana, I forgive you for being human, for being flawed, for making mistakes that hurt our family." He paused. "What I'm still learning to forgive is the calculation, the planning, the systematic deception, the willingness to sacrifice Lily's stability for your own desires. And if you can't forgive that, then we'll figure out how to build a different kind of marriage, one based on honesty and accountability instead of trust and faith." Viana was quiet for a moment. "Is that enough? For you?" Dean looked around the dining room at his daughter solving algebra problems, at his wife helping with homework, at the home he'd built through 15 years of work and sacrifice. I don't know yet, he said honestly, but it's what we have. And it's more than we had when you were planning to leave me for a man who ghosted you the moment I threatened his comfortable lies. Fiona flinched at the reminder, but she didn't argue or defend. 9 months of therapy had taught her the difference between accepting responsibility and accepting consequences. I'm going to keep trying, she said, to earn back what I threw away. I know you are, and I'm going to keep trying to figure out if that's enough. Lily looked up from her homework. I got it. X equals 12. Dean checked her work. Perfect. You figured out what you didn't know by using what you did know. Is that what you and Mom are doing? Figuring out what you don't know? The question caught both parents off guard. Dean looked at Fiona, then back at their daughter. Something like that, sweetheart. Sometimes adults have to solve problems that don't have easy answers. But you'll figure it out, right? You always figure everything out. Dean felt the weight of his daughter's faith in him. Lily trusted him to fix whatever was broken in their family, just like he'd always fixed everything else. I hope so, Lily. I really hope so. That night, after Lily was asleep, Dean sat in his home office reviewing client files. Fiona appeared in the doorway, something she'd done every night for the past year. Can I come in? Of course. Fiona sat in the chair across from his desk, the same chair where he'd first confronted her about the affair. I've been thinking about what you said at dinner, about building a different kind of marriage. And I want you to know that I understand what I cost us. The trust, the faith, the assumption that we were on the same team. I understand that those things might never come back. Dean looked up from his laptop. Fiona, that's not entirely true. We are on the same team now. The team of people who love Lily and want what's best for her. Is that enough? It's a start. Everything else, we'll figure out as we go. Fiona nodded. I love you, Dean. I know I have a strange way of showing it, but I do love you. Dean studied his wife's face. I love you too, Fiona, but I also know what you're capable of when you feel neglected or unhappy or justified in your resentment. And that scares you. It teaches me about the importance of paying attention, about the dangers of assuming, about the difference between loving someone and trusting them completely. Fiona stood to leave, then turned back. Do you think we'll make it? Really? Dean closed his laptop and looked at his wife, the woman who'd planned to destroy their family, who'd spent a year trying to rebuild what she'd broken, who still asked him every night if they were going to be okay. I think we'll make it to whatever we're supposed to become, whether that's a restored marriage or a functional co-parenting relationship or something else entirely. But you don't know which one? Fiona, a year ago I thought I knew exactly who you were and what our marriage was. I was wrong about both. Now I know better than to make predictions about things I can't control. Fiona smiled sadly. You can't control whether you'll ever trust me again. No, but I can control whether I pay attention to who you actually are instead of who I assume you are. After Fiona left, Dean sat alone in his office thinking about trust and forgiveness and the difference between rebuilding and starting over. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is James Morrison. I know you told me never to contact you, but I wanted you to know that I'm divorced now. Patricia found out about everything. I lost my business too. I just wanted to say that you were right about Fiona. She never loved me. She loved what she thought I could provide. When I couldn't provide it anymore, she never even tried to contact me. I'm sorry for what I did to your family. Dean stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Some apologies were too late to matter. Some consequences were too permanent to undo. Some choices created ripples that never stopped spreading. But sometimes, if you were very careful and very deliberate and very honest about what was broken and what could be rebuilt, you could create something new from the pieces of what was destroyed. Dean didn't know if his marriage would survive Fiona's betrayal, but he knew that his family would survive it. And sometimes, that was enough to build on. He closed his laptop and went upstairs to check on Lily, who was sleeping peacefully in her room, surrounded by algebra homework and the comfortable certainty that her father would always protect her. That, at least, was a promise Dean knew he could keep. Thank you for reading. My wife said we're happy without you. So I quietly forwarded a message that changed everything. This story explores themes of betrayal, accountability, and the complex process of rebuilding trust after devastating choices. Sometimes the most important victories are not about winning, but about protecting what matters most. If this story resonated with you, please share your thoughts in the comments. Which character's perspective did you find most compelling?